Okay, so question 1 is a factual recall question. And it asks, apart from measles, which 2 other diseases does the MMR vaccine protect against? And the answer is mumps and rubella. You could have them in either order, but you needed both for that mark. Part B, for this one, you're going to have to work out a percentage, and it's asking you to calculate the percentage of children who caught measles in April 2013 who had not been vaccinated against MMR. So for this question, you've really got to pick out some of the numbers. So let me just highlight those. And to work this out, you would do 504 divided by 630 and then times the answer by 100, which would give you the answer, which is 80%. The key to this next question is the fact that you have to name one advantage to the whole population. And the advantage would be the idea of there being less chance of the disease spreading. And finally, for this page, what does a vaccine contain? Again, this is a factual recall question, and it contains a dead or weakened pathogen. The answer to the next question is the fact that when you are vaccinated, the dead or weakened pathogen stimulates the white blood cells to produce antibodies. Then when you get this disease, or an exposure to this disease, these antibodies are produced rapidly, and these antibodies would kill the pathogen. The reason why antibiotics cannot be used to treat measles is because measles are a virus, and antibiotics do not kill viruses. For the second mark, you also had to say that a virus lives inside a living cell. This next question is testing your use of keywords, and the key word you had to use here was the word resistant or resistance. So why do antibiotics become less useful at treating an infection if the antibiotic is overused? You had to say that that pathogen or that bacteria will develop resistance. Again, this question is a factual recall question, and the answer to what type of neuron is neuron X is a motor neuron. For question 2b, it's a 3-mark question, so you needed to make 3 points. For your first mark, you had to say that the relay neuron would release a chemical. Instead of the word chemical, you could use the word neurotransmitter. For the second mark, you had to say that this chemical or neurotransmitter diffuses across the synapse. And for the third mark, you had to say that this chemical or neurotransmitter would then bind to neuron X. For question 2c, you had to use the information in the table to help you answer this. Now this is a describe question, so effectively you're saying what you see, and it asks you to describe the effect of each toxin on the response by muscles. So for the first toxin, you had to say that that would result in a decrease in muscle contractions, and the second toxin, you had to say that that would increase the number of muscle contractions. The first part of question 3 is again another factual recall question. What was the drug thalidomide originally developed for? You had to get the idea of poor sleeping, as it was originally a sleeping pill. For question 3a, what other condition could it treat? Well, it was used to treat morning sickness. One harmful side effect of thalidomide was birth defects or limb abnormalities. The reason this side effect had not been detected was because the drug had not been tested on pregnant animals or women. What happens in the body to make someone dependent on a drug? Well, for this one, the mark scheme wanted it can change chemical processes within the body. Okay, and because of that, people then become dependent on it. This next question presents you with a graph. And before looking at the question, what you really need to do is have a look at the graph and understand what it's showing you. At the bottom, you've got different types of drugs, and up the side, you've got the dependence, or how dependent people are on the drug. Obviously, the different colours on the graph represent the different classes of drugs, with the ones in white being unclassified. The question states that some people think that some legal drugs should be made illegal. What evidence is there from the graph to support this view? The key part here is it says what evidence is there from the graph. So you absolutely must be using data from the graph to support your answer. And the evidence from the graph is that some people are more dependent on legal drugs than they are on illegal drugs. So as you can see here, nicotine, people are much more dependent on nicotine than they are on, let's say, anabolic steroids or cannabis. So for your first mark, you had to say that there are examples of where people are more dependent on legal drugs than there are on illegal drugs. And then you had to use an example. For example, more people seem to be dependent on nicotine than they are on cannabis. And using that example would get you the second mark. The answer to this next question is you would also want to know how harmful the drug is or if it had any side effects before you started changing the drug's classification. This next question is a long answer question and is worth 6 marks. Again, there's a big clue here in bold that they are going to be looking at your written communication, your spelling, your grammar, your punctuation. So before you start this question, you really need to be putting together a bit of a plan, okay? You could use a little bit of this space on the exam paper to think about how you're going to structure the answer, what's going to come first, second and third, for example. Planning your answer will also ensure that you address the 3 points it asks you to refer to. Planning your answer will also ensure that you address the main points that it's asking you to cover. I would start this answer by first of all describing what diffusion is, as the movement of particles or molecules from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, or down the concentration gradient. You then need to go through and name examples of where diffusion is used in animals and plants, and also remember to name the substances that are diffusing. So I'll go through and read out what the mark scheme wanted. So you could have said that diffusion is used in gas exchange, for example respiration, when oxygen and CO2 diffuse. You could have mentioned it's used in photosynthesis, where CO2 diffuses into the leaf and oxygen diffuses out. You could talk about how it's used in the digestive system, for example when glucose and amino acids are absorbed. You could talk about how it's used in transpiration, when water is lost from the leaves. You could also talk about how water is absorbed by the roots. Question 5a shows you an equation and asks you to name the process. Again, this is a factual recall question, and if you want to be hitting your target grades, you cannot afford to be getting these wrong. The answer is anaerobic respiration. This next question, again, is showing you a graph. And just like last time, before we look at the question, we're going to have a look at the graph to make sure we understand what it shows. Along the bottom, you've got treadmill speed, so it's showing you how fast the treadmill is going. And up the side, you've got the amount of lactic acid being produced. So as you can see, the faster the athlete is running, the more lactic acid is being produced. The question asks you how much more lactic acid was there in the athlete's blood when he ran at 14 kilometers per hour than when he ran at 8 kilometers per hour. Okay, the phrase how much more tells you you're going to have to work out the difference between the number at 14 kilometers per hour and the number at 8 kilometers per hour. You have to go up to the graph and obviously read off the graph. If you go up from 14 and to the line and come across, you'll get a figure of 6.8. If you repeat the same process at 8 kilometers an hour, you'll get a figure at approximately 2.4. Work out the difference between these and your answer is 4.4. This next question asks you why is there more lactic acid made in the muscles when running at 14 kilometers per hour rather than running at 8 kilometers per hour. It's a 3-mark question, so you need to write 3 points. Your first point is that if the person is running faster, they're going to require more energy. Unfortunately, oxygen can't be supplied to the muscles quick enough. That's your second mark. And for your third mark, you had to say if the muscles are not getting enough oxygen, they would then start to carry out anaerobic respiration. And as we saw from the equation earlier in the question, anaerobic respiration produces lactic acid. Question 6a is again a factual recall question, and it asks you to name these 2 glands in the body. Gland A is a pituitary gland, and gland B is the ovary or ovaries. This next question asks you how FSH moves from gland A to gland B. The key to this question is the word hormone. Now from your revision, you should have found out that a hormone is a chemical messenger that's transported in the blood. So the answer to this question is the blood or bloodstream. The answer to this next question is FSH and LH. This next question states, describe how mature eggs are used in IVF treatment so that women may become pregnant. Effectively, all it's wanting you to do is describe the IVF process. It's a 3-mark question, so again we're going to need 3 marks. Your first mark is for stating that the egg would be fertilised. Your second mark is that you would allow this fertilised egg to develop into an embryo. And your third mark comes for stating that this embryo would then be inserted back into the mother's womb or uterus, and then obviously the woman hopefully would give birth to a baby. This next question asks you to suggest one reason why clinics have been set a target to reduce multiple births. Now, multiple births are where a woman would give birth to more than one baby at once. Now, it didn't want an answer to do with anything to do with cost or any economic reason. The reasons it wanted were anything to do with the health of the baby or the health of the mother. So you could have stated that multiple births may cause harm to the mother, embryo, etc. This next question asks you to compare the success rates of the 2 clinics in 2007. Now it presents you with a table of data. What you really need to do is get your head around what the table is showing you. Okay, so for each clinic it shows you the total number of IVF treatments, and it then shows you the success rates, or how many IVF treatments resulted in pregnancy. At first glance it would look like clinic R has a higher success rate because there are 200 IVF treatments resulting in pregnancy. However, if you look a little bit closer, they're both clinic R and clinic S have around 20% success rate, and that's the mark for this question. You had to say that both clinics have a near identical success rate of approximately 20%. The next question states, the range of the predicted success rate in 2008 for clinic R was much smaller than the range of the predicted success rate for clinic S. Suggest why. Again, the key to this question is to look at the table, and if you look up at the table you can see that clinic R have carried out much more treatments, and that's your first mark. If you say that actually clinic R has carried out more treatments, your second mark comes from saying that because they've carried out more treatments they're more likely to be more reliable in their predictions. Question 7 is again showing you a graph. So it's important before you look at the questions you interpret the graph and really understand what it's showing. Along the bottom you've got pH, and up the side you've got enzyme activity. The first question asks you what is the optimum pH for the action of enzyme Z. So you really have to understand what that word optimum means, and that's where is the enzyme working best, and that would be at the peak of the curve. So I'll highlight it there for you, and that would be the optimum. So you have to read off the graph, come down to the pH, and your answer would be 8.6. The next question states the stomach makes a substance that gives the correct pH for enzyme action in the human stomach. And you have to name this substance. The substance is hydrochloric acid. The next question states which enzyme, X, Y or Z, will work best in the human stomach. Well, if you know that the stomach produces hydrochloric acid, you also know that an acid has a very low pH. So you need to go back up to the graph and have a look at which enzyme is working best at a low pH. That is enzyme X. So your answer to this question would be enzyme X.